I'm Jack,
And I'm Jalen.
and we're going to go through a mock behavioral interview, which is the style of interview that we use in BC's recruitment process. With this video, we hope that you'll be able to walk into any behavioral interview and our recruitment process a lot more confident.
Yeah, so today Jack is going to ask me a few common behavioral questions similar to the ones found in our recruitment process. To the best of my ability, I'll try to answer the question, and then we'll break it down identifying tips and points to focus on when you are in a behavioral interview.
All right, Jalen, you ready to get into it?
Let's do it. Hey, how are you?
Hey, Jalen, doing well. How are you?
Awesome, nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you as well. Feel free to take a seat.
Thank you.
So we have two questions for you today. We're going to give you 5 minutes each for those, so that'll be 10 minutes in total. So if you're ready, then we can get started.
Sounds good.
All right. So the first question. Talk about a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was very different than yours.
Yeah, so I'll talk about an experience that I've had within both of my management style and technological consulting organizations here on campus. So during my first couple of semesters on campus, I joined a management style consulting org on campus where we worked with a number of different clients ranging from online travel agencies, autonomous trucking companies, but as a non-traditional major with actuarial science, for example, on teams with majors of being in business, engineering. I often thought that my thought process or problem solving skills or even my personality was often quite different from the members of my team, leaders, or even other members of the organization. And so instead of looking at that as something that would kind of discourage me being a part of the team or serving my client, I actually found this to be a situation that I could use as a benefit. For example, given that we had difference in personalities or diversity in thought, we would be able to work with one another. And I think the best way that I kind of dealt with those differences was by communicating with my team and my project manager. For example, just emphasizing that I think we need to have an open line of communication and really utilize our differences in thought to better serve each other on the team, but most importantly, our client. Utilizing our differences in personalities, our educations, and even most importantly, our majors as different tools and resources that we could then create, a comprehensive deliverable for our client.
All right, now for your second question, tell me about a time you were under a lot of pressure. What was going on and how did you get through it?
Yeah, I'll talk about my internship experience this past summer. So some of the things I was delegated to this past summer, I was assigned to a specific team, that worked alongside 6-7 other teams, but on the specific team I was on, part of the internship was to work on several smaller sized projects initially in terms of kind of learning how the different team operates and works alongside the rest of the business. But truly by the end of the internship to be able to take what you've learned and be able to create either a full product, service, or some sort of like software improvements to that specific team, and then kind of have a final presentation to the rest of the business. So kind of going back to the question in terms of where that pressure kind of started, at the beginning of my internship and after kind of exhausting the exploratory and research kind of phase, I had kind of begun to craft my final project and presentation and set kind of initial goals for myself as to where I wanted to be, at certain points in the internship and where I ultimately wanted to be by the end. And so part of the project that I was involved creating a database, working with tons of data, and finally doing some reporting. And so some of the softwares that I actually used included, like SQL and Power BI, alongside a few other, resources such as R and Python. But overall, through that, I realized that, what I had learned kind of in the classroom needed to be elevated in terms of my, internship experience. And so initially I had kind of set out a few weeks to be in the exploratory learning phases for all of those software platforms. But, I realized that I needed to spend a little bit, more time. And so kind of on that research and kind of understanding all the languages, I spent most of the first half of my time that I allocated for the project actually working on that. And so kind of that pressure kind of to build up as I was, approaching the end of my internship, coming up on the last few weeks until the presentation, realizing that I was still kind of in this research learning phase and hadn't really begun my implementation. And so, once I had dealt with that kind of realization that pressure had been built up, I took a step back, reevaluated my goals in terms of, what have I learned thus far, and what can I now continue, what can I start making with the tool set that I have. Once I began to kind of build some of the implementation, I think that kind of is when the project started to click for me, that now I was able to learn a little bit more of what I was still missing a little bit more quicker, and then kind of incorporate it into what I had already built. And I think with that kind of flip in mindset, with a little bit of pressure, knowing that I had a deadline coming up, I was able to then, get back on track and reevaluate my goals once again, to then truly be able to, by the end of the internship, in which I was able to create a full functioning new product for the team.
All right, Jalen. So before I start giving you all the feedback that I have, do you have anything that you want to say about how you thought the interview went, good or bad?
Yeah, I think certain things that went, well in that interview is I was able to, appropriately articulate some of the experiences that I thought, best conveyed some of the questions that were asked. I think other things that I liked about that interview is that I was fully able to kind of tell, a full story about, my experiences, and more specifically, how it actually connected to what was being asked. I think in terms of some things that I could definitely, improve upon, or being maybe a little bit more direct, with the question, and or, being a little bit more concise at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think you did a really great job answering the question. So you talked a lot about your management and consulting experience. So one thing that you touched on that I thought was really great was you mentioned that you're an actuarial science major, which makes you think a little bit differently than everyone else that you were working with, which I think ties in a lot to what the question was asking. One thing that I would say is that since the question was asking about personality, you just have to be very careful that you're addressing it directly. And so I was a little worried you weren't going to address it at first, but then I think as the interview went on, you did tie it around about how that major did tie into your personality, and how that did affect the team dynamic. You also talked about how being different in your major and having a diverse team was actually a benefit, and I thought that was really great, talking about how diversity can actually breed strength. And then you also talked a lot about how communication is key. I'm talking about your manager and that kind of thing. And so I think that shows that you're an easier person to work with, and that you're good at showing what's going on in your work and what's going on in your life. So I could tell that you really cared about what you were talking about, which I think was really great. We want to see passion in our answers. But yeah, I thought you did a really great job, and I'd love to hear more. All right, so going into your second question, you talked a bit about the internship that you did over the summer, which I thought was really great. You talked about a more recent experience, because the summer is just about as recent as you can really get, which I thought was great. That's what we're looking for. So you kind of talked about how you were signed on a team and working on small projects. And so after you established what you were doing in this internship, you took it back to the question and addressed the question directly, which I thought was great. Because sometimes I think all the pressure of the interview can kind of make you forget the question, forget what you're really answering. So you went back and addressed it and talked about where this pressure came from, and talked about how you addressed that pressure and grew from it. So you talked about setting goals for yourself. You mentioned the software that you used, which I thought was great, because you really went deep into the experience and gave us some details. So this is something that you've thought about. This is something that you really spent a lot of time doing, and it's something that you learned that you could use in the future outside of this internship. So you spent a lot more time learning those languages, and then at the end you took a step back and the project started to click. So I think taking a step back is something that we all need to do sometimes, that we might forget to do. That really lets you think about the big picture and what you've been doing. And then you talked about how you created that new product and you were really satisfied with the conclusion. So I thought it was a good story of growth, and how you addressed that pressure directly and accomplished what you set out to accomplish.
Definitely.
So.
Thanks for letting me share my experience.
Of course, thanks for doing this, Jalen. So now that we're done with the interview section, we have some general tips that we want to mention so that you are fully prepared for what our interview process has. So the first thing we want to talk about is that we want you guys to focus on more recent experiences. I kind of mentioned this when I was talking about Jalen's interview, but we want to hear about the most recent things that you've been doing. So late high school or early college.
Definitely. I think another tip that we definitely kind of saw in the mock scenario as well as just general is really go deeper, be very detailed oriented. It might not necessarily matter, the name of the organization or even kind of at the surface level, but truly paint a picture as to, what the impact you had, what you were involved in, and truly, what you accomplished as a result. So I think a combination of those is going to be truly valuable.
Mm-hmm. One other thing that we wanted to mention is that we want you to talk about what's on your resume, but we want to make sure that you're not afraid to go off the resume and talk about other things that you're involved in or passionate about. We certainly want you to talk about the experiences on your resume as well, because we're sure those are great experiences. But if we ask a question and something that might not be on your resume, that's an experience really stands out to you, we want you to talk about what you're most passionate about and what you have a lot of care for, and that's not always on the resume. So we want you guys to be sure that you're really talking about what applies best to each question and what you care about.
Yeah, going on top of that, truly reflect on the values, the experiences, and the goals, that have truly shaped you to be the person, that you are, and or the career that you strive, to have. Anytime, when you're in a behavioral interview, you kind of want to be looking at how can you showcase, the combination of that and really truly understand, what you really want out of your career, what the organization you're applying for can help facilitate in your career, and or what can you give back to that organization. So I think if you keep a lot of that in mind while you're going through the recruitment process or in any kind of behavioral interview, that's surely going to help you.
One other thing that we wanted to touch on is that Jalen's experiences are clearly coming from the perspective of a junior, someone with a little more professional experience. So you all probably don't have the same job experience and organization within college experience, so you're not expected to be perfect. We just want to hear the best experiences that you have and how you've been shaped and the kind of person that you are. So the last tip that I want to mention before we close out is that this isn't the only practice that is out there. Please look up other behavioral questions online, other tips for interviewing in general. There's a lot of resources out there, and practice makes perfect. I would say that's the best way to really get good at behavioral interviewing, just having more practice. So thanks for watching this, and good luck in the recruitment process going forward.